Gentlemen, before we do start tonight's meeting, we'll just start with a quick introduction to everyone that's sat on this committee today. I'm Councillor Mohammed Adnan.
Hi, Neil Watson, Assistant Director for Planning, Building Control.
Ashley Sutcliffe, Councillor for Horsefield and Waterside and Colne.
Sarah Coburn-Price, Councillor for Woolsworth and Fulridge.
David Garnier, Councillor for Barrowford and Pendleside.
Nadeem Ahmed, Councillor for Barrowford and Pendleside.
David Whip, I represent Avian Coach Ward.
Sajjad Ahmed, Councillor for Bradfield East and Clover.
Yeah, Councillor Yasser Iqbal, Bradfield West and Reedley.
Joanne Eccles, a Committee Administrator at Pendle Council.
Right, first item on today's agenda is, does any member have any interest which he or she wishes to declare?
No, thank you, Chair.
Fine, thank you. Could we please approve the minutes from the last meeting on the 19th of September?
Move those.
Thank you. Right, on to the planning applications. First application which we have down is 23/0485/HHO for the erection and access of a porch at 35 Clegg Street, Bryfield. Do we have anyone that wishes to speak on this?
Chair.
Just before we do it, there has been an updated report that's gone around to approve this with the conditions attached.
I've just putting the plans up, Chairman. Amended plans have come in now showing a sliding gate which we asked for so that the gates aren't either opening over the highway or into the site, which will preclude parking or obviously a danger to pedestrians. There's two car parking spaces in the site and it is tight, but there is space for the vehicles to turn around, so the Chairman, the recommendation has changed and refused to approve.
Thank you, Councillor Yasser.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, can I just ask one question? I know that I've seen the update. I went for a site visit because it's in my ward. There was an issue with the porch, but I think on the previous report there was no issue with the porch. So obviously that's not been amended because I was already. So this is just the access. If you remember, we did a site visit on this a couple of months back. I think some of my colleagues opposite were there. I think, was it the 5 metre width as well that was, is that now part of this updated planning?
No, Chairman, we had a careful look at it, and in the location, in its setting, we didn't think there was sufficient grounds to refuse, so we didn't recommend refusal to the porch.
Okay, that's fine, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ahmed.
Yeah, I think with the previous application, with the original plans that were submitted, there were some concerns regarding highways, in particular the parking and access to the site. With the amended plans that we've now received, showing the new sliding gate which Mr Watson refers to, and it's got space for 2 cars now, which is acceptable, and the vehicles can turn around and in the property itself. So I'm happy to move that we approve this application.
I'll second that, Chair.
Councillor Coburn-Price.
May I ask about the gate piers? LCC were wanting those to be removed for visibility reasons.
Chairman, I think you would if they were narrower, but they've made the gate wide enough that you will be able to see approaching pedestrians through there, and the gate would have to slide fully back. I'm happy that it is balanced, and they are higher than the 1 metre you would normally have, but in my opinion you're having sufficient visibility within the access.
Do we have any other speakers on that?
Just a brief one, Chairman, just to say that we obviously, when we've scrutinised this planning application before, there were serious concerns about pedestrians and visibility, so because that's been mitigated, I think that it's right to now move to approval on that. We may disagree on the design of the porch. I know that some of us had concerns about that, but I think if that's something we can't discuss or can't do anything about, then this is the best we're going to get from this application, and I'm glad that we kind of held it to account really to get the best outcome.
No,
That's fine. Do we have any other speakers on that then? Shall we just move to the vote then? All those in favour to approve the application? All those against? That's approved, thank you. Moving on to the second application, 23/0521. This is for the dog kennels at Pendlebridge Lodge on Wood End Road. We do have 6 speakers on this, so just to remind all members that only if your names are down you're allowed to speak on this application. And we are going to restrict it to 5 minutes, please. Do we have Lisa Tennant?
Good evening, people. Here we are again. Just in case anybody doesn't know me, I'm Lisa, the owner of K9 Rehab. I'm standing before you today to speak about the current planning application that Pendle Council recommends to be refused. As you are all aware, I rehabilitate dogs with issues. Quite a lot of dogs that are classed as dangerous and reactive to people and other dogs pass through my gates every single week. Some weeks over 70 dogs attend these classes in clinics. Sometimes it's necessary to remove a dog from the handler to get to the root of the problem. Unfortunately, it's usually the handler that's the issue. By having the dog on a short residential course, I can rehabilitate the dog, reunite with the owner, and then train them together to resolve any issues. Quite often I use my own dogs to work with these dogs that are in for residential training, so I need to have access to my dogs at all times. I need to be on site 24/7 to care for the residential dogs, the dogs booked in daily for training for my own. Nobody in the right mind would leave a dog overnight unattended, and definitely not a dog that is classed as possibly dangerous or shut down due to trauma or other issues. The RSPCA actually states a dog should not be left unattended for more than 4 hours, whether it's 1 dog, 5 or 10 dogs. This is their recommendation. So in the light of the current climate with dog attacks on the rise and XL bullies about to be banned, there's never been a greater need for my services. Pendle, as a borough, should be working with me to keep this area safe and provide rehabilitation for all the dogs bought or bred during lockdown. People have now returned to work and they deem these dogs difficult and they simply don't want to put the effort into working with them to help the dog to be the pet they want. Rescue centres are bursting at the seams and the issue is now at crisis point. And I'd just like to point out that the government class my business as recreational as well as educational, and this is the reason that I was allowed to continue work through the lockdown period. So instead of building another construction on Greenbelt, which was the original reason for refusal, we've converted part of the existing stable block into a modest 2-bed, single-storey workers' dwelling, so as not to impact on the openness of the area, which was the reason the previous application wasn't passed. The kennels are to be of a wooden structure, fully insulated, and just short of 5 feet high, to definitely have no impact on the openness of the Greenbelt, as they're not even as big as a garden shed, and which hundreds of people have on Greenbelt in this area without any issue to the openness. If my land was still agricultural, then animal housing of this side wouldn't even be a question. The EHO have raised a noise nuisance concern, so I've submitted a management plan. I've got cameras recording 24/7. I've offered to send these as proof there isn't any noise from the dog attending the facilities or from my own dogs, but the officer was declined. I've also offered a site visit at any opportunity, but this was also declined. I've got the officer states that I have on site 15 dogs, which is incorrect. The maximum dogs will be 10, including my own 5, which only bark to alert intruders, not when the other dogs bark. If this were the case, we'd be barking all night and day, along with the local resident dogs, which cause far more noise nuisance than any other dog attending my facility. In the 4 years I've been operating from here, there's never been a noise complaint regarding any of my dogs barking or any dogs attending. I'd also ask why it's necessary to carry out a noise assessment when one of the reasons for recommended refusal is isolation. We're definitely not isolated. There are 17 properties within a few minutes walk, and recently planning has been passed for another 4 at Pendlebridge Gardens, the former garden centre, which is less than 200 yards away from my site. So after the previous meeting, it was requested about the noise assessment, which is in the pipeline. The lead time for this service is 3 to 4 weeks, and the collating of the information takes a further 2 to 3 weeks to compile this report. As I've only had less than 2 weeks to organise this, I can submit it to the planning department once it's been actioned, but obviously we can't get it at the minute. The video evidence that all dogs are under control at all times is available for anyone to view at any time via a downloaded link. You can add this to your mobile phone or to a laptop, and this is always going to continue to be the case with the residential dogs, as everything I do is recorded for insurance purposes. My application is also requesting a 3-year temporary planning approval. So if the council are not happy with the noise or any service I provide or any other aspect, then it's literally a no-risk situation for them. I've been running the training camp for over 15 years. It's 100% sustainable and extremely necessary. So over the next 3 years, I can prove there's a continued requirement for this service and rehabilitate the already huge waiting list for dogs desperate for residential treatment. Previously, under Hyndburn Council, we've had no issue, even though I was on Greenbelt, with my facility in Bridgeton. Burnley Council have also informally reviewed my application and have also said they don't have an issue with passing it. There have been previously other applications similar to mine passed throughout the north of England, and it was stated by the planning department that I don't meet the criteria for a rural workers dwelling. But after reading all the applications that have been passed, I most certainly do. So which criteria am I not meeting with this application? My team helped so many dogs each week. So in order to do this, we need this facility in this area. So please think carefully about the impact this has locally. Thank you.
Ian Shaw.
Hi there, good evening councillors and good evening Mr Watson. I just want to say that I'd like to fully endorse everything that Lisa has said. So I won't repeat all those points, but as a layperson, it seems really strange that we're wanting to refuse an application that is only going to serve the good of this community. It's good for everybody, it's good for dog owners, it's good for people without dogs, it's going to keep the people of Pendle safer. There's zero impact to the green belt because we're just using an existing building. Now that was mainly the reason for the last refusal, was that there was going to be an erection of a building. That is not happening. There is no impact on Greenbelt whatsoever. There's also in the area, not more than a few hundred metres away, there's stables that have been converted into a residence. There's a barn that's been converted into a residence. Further up, there have been people living in a caravan with permission for 14 years. Why is this one refused? It doesn't make sense. There are people living, residents, not far down, further down Wood End Road, living in caravans. This is all going on, but yet it seems that these people are being unfairly victimised with this. It's just not right. We really need to do the right thing as a council here and vote and pass this. It's for the good of everybody, and there is no detriment or negative impact on anybody whatsoever. Thank you.
Tracy Law.
Hello. So I do feel like I've stated the reasons why we support Lisa and John on their plot several times, so I will be repeating some stuff, so do forgive me. So we're Tracy and Brian, and we're direct neighbours of John and Lisa as our land adjoins theirs, and we have use of their track to access our plot. I again highlight how strongly supported this work is by the huge number of positive testimonies from people who rely on Lisa's services and believe strongly that there is a need for Lisa's expertise and experience in the rehabilitation and socialisation of traumatised dogs. Also, that for a great number of dogs this can only be achieved through a residential stay with intensive work being carried out and requiring around-the-clock care. I'm a counsellor and a qualified animal-assisted therapy practitioner specialising in ecotherapy. My therapeutic practice with individual clients and small groups is carried out on our plot of land next door to Lisa and John. Through my work, I experience continual proof of how being outside in an open, natural environment has a calming and de-stressing value all of its own. However, there's also a massive body of research that proves that a rural setting and being immersed in nature is highly conducive for therapeutic work to happen, as it provides a calm and tranquil space and psychological safety. This is also true for therapeutic intensive training and rehabilitation of traumatised animals. I have valued at times being able to take a small group of young people from a very local special provision school up the track to John and Lisa's. Here, young people, guided by Lisa, have had the freedom to interact with the horses and John and Lisa's own dogs. This has offered them a different experience from our plot, interacting with nature through gardening, foraging, hens, bees, and our small therapy dogs. and allowed me to observe the interactions between young people and larger animals, and so work therapeutically with their emerging feelings and responses. I include this information to highlight how a supportive community has been established to aid people and animals to find healing and health. We have only seen responsible, well-organised events. I'm thinking especially of the group walks to socialise dogs, where the group go down the track alongside our plot in a very quiet, controlled and respectful manner. I also want to highlight that we and our neighbours have shown a huge commitment to supporting wildlife and of being good stewards to our land. Our plots did not feel very greenbelt when we took them on 4.5 years ago. We had a colossal task of removing vast amounts of noxious invasive weeds, clearing years of fly-tipped rubbish, and in restoring the environment to be green and rural. This is at the very heart and the underpinning of our therapeutic work. We continue to undertake this maintenance, as on and around Wood End Road there are a good number of dwellings. It's so very close to a built-up area, and rubbish and fly tipping still occurs. We are surprised that noise is being considered as an issue, as the area is quite noisy anyway. Being so close to the M65 and having continual heavy traffic on Wood End Road throughout the day. There are no neighbourhood dogs who do bark, but my understanding is that Lisa and John's full-time presence on the land will prevent any noise issues and allow distressed or noisy dogs to be attended to with immediacy. We fully support John and Lisa's application to live on their plot, to extend Lisa's work with traumatised dogs, as it will have no negative and only a positive impact on the rural environment. And making this change will allow valuable rehabilitation work to be carried out. So I reiterate, as really close neighbours to John and Lisa, we strongly support this application.
Sharon Ashley.
Hello there, my name's Sharon Ashley and I'm here in support of Lisa. I manage our local dog rescue, Pendle Dogs in Need. We have ourselves as a rescue used Lisa's services on many occasions. But I'm here just to reiterate what's already been said, that the dog rescue in the whole of the UK at the current time is in an absolute crisis situation. There is no spaces anywhere. We are getting multiple phone calls, messages, emails every single day of the week with people trying to get rid of their dogs that they don't want anymore. These are the lockdown dogs, a lot of them. We've also got a massive cost of living crisis that we all know about, mental health crisis, all knock on. We've got a whole generation of undertrained, under-socialised dogs in our midst, inexperienced owners, irresponsible owners. And that's something that we're dealing with every day. People like Lisa and the work Lisa does is helping with this because it's preventing a lot of these dogs from hitting the rescues. The biggest reason people want to hand their dogs to us and they don't want them anymore is behavioural issues. And we're not just talking about aggressive behaviour when we talk about the work Lisa does and the issues these dogs have got. We're talking about dogs that are anxious, dogs that are scared, dogs that are resource guarded, dogs that are bored. And this all brings around these behaviour problems that end up with owners wanting to get rid. Rehabilitation place is absolutely vital in this. We have a young dog in kennels. She's been in kennels, she's been on waiting lists for various rehab places for months. There is no spaces. I would love to be ringing up Lisa and saying, please will you take this dog and work with her, and then we can successfully put her in a home placement that's going to succeed. I'm not going to go on and on and on and on, but what I'll say is what we have got with the work Lisa does and the way she wants to develop the work she does is an absolute asset. It's a fantastic thing. And we're going to lose it. If this planning is refused yet again for no sensible reasons, this is something we're going to lose. And for Pendle, it's going to be, and Burnley and Pendle and the whole area, it's going to be an absolute tragedy, and we will be really sorry to see it go. As somebody who works with dogs every single day. All right.
Jacqueline Hodson.
I'm speaking on behalf of Marie Clancy. She's not able to be here this evening.
That's fine.
Okay. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to speak on behalf of this application today. Marie Clancy, whose supporting document this is, has spent over 20 years working in law firms, much of that in compliance capacity, meeting Law Society and government-based regulatory standards. She therefore understands the importance of not just meeting criteria, but also of understanding how those criteria can be applied in different businesses and different circumstances. Firstly, I'd like to speak to the alleged isolated location. I think she meant to say speak regarding the alleged isolated location. As someone who has visited this site, which I do hope those make decisions about this have taken the time to do, it is interesting to hear the suggestion that it is not in a location suitable for residential accommodation. It's undeniably private, but by no means anyone's definition of isolated. Given that you could go speak to an entire row of residents whose gardens back onto the applicant's field, where you feel a little lonely, if you were fit to feel a little lonely. I'm not sure that any of those people consider their property in a location unsuitable for dwellings, and I'm fairly sure that they are occasionally sold and bought, so there are others who clearly agree. As if that wasn't enough, as well as the track to the property, there is also easy access via footpath SP 136035, which connects that land directly to Wood End via Pendle Bridge. So for those who haven't visited, think Upper Lane, opposite a park, not Wuthering Heights. Secondly, on page 30, there is a statement that taking care of 5 dogs overnight is not adequate justification for the conversion of the stables into a dwelling. This suggests that there is a number which would justify such presence, and it does not dispute that there is a requirement for residential stays for some dogs. The fact that the number of animals is irrelevant. Their fundamental needs aren't only present if there is a group of them. One animal is in that location, particularly with the special needs, which would have brought it to a rehab facility, means that it is unsuitable and irresponsible to leave it unattended overnight. No responsible dog or shelter owner would ever leave their animal in a facility which was unmanned for the hours that constitutes overnight, for the same reason that no one applying to foster a dog would be accepted if they stated that it was their intention to stay elsewhere overnight. The fact is that some of the dogs require more intervention than others, and sometimes without the added element of the owner. In order to offer the full range of rehabilitation services, particularly for those with more severe difficulties, residential care is necessary. Once residential care is required, then an overnight presence is also required. At the last committee hearing, the planning officer was asked what might be considered special circumstances for a rural workers' dwelling. He struggled to provide answers. Having conducted research, I can help with 3 real-life examples. In February this year, planning consultants Acoris was successful in securing a permanent rural workers' dwelling in connection with an equine business which undertook the breeding of standard bred horses for sports and harness racing, show jumping and eventing. The dwelling approval was granted for this business, which, like canine rehab, was proving to be thriving, profitable and viable in the long term. The planner reported that an inspector had allowed plans for a rural workers' dwelling at a farm in Lincolnshire after agreeing need for the appellant for the appellant to be written sight and sound of livestock meant the dwelling was operationally essential and not merely convenient. A rural workers' dwelling application at Lakemore Fisheries in Cheshire was permitted, concluding that the accommodation was essential to the business's operations. This particular application was successful on the grounds of the opportunities it provided for recreation to the people who visited it. This is a thriving, established business of which the council should be proud. There is a similar facility in Doncaster, but in the 2 years that I lived there during COVID-19, I travelled weekly to canine rehab for the superior services which it provided. I would ask that this committee recognise its value to the area, its role as a worthy custodian of the Greenbelt and a provider of protection to the local people from dangerous dogs and inexperienced, poorly trained owners. Thank you.
Last speaker, Robbie Attilgan. Sorry.
Right. This is the fourth meeting I've attended in support of this application. And I've heard the Greenbelt argument now from every angle. Those of you who know me will know that I rarely speak out in favour of building on green land. But there is building and there is building. And this application needs to be judged on its merits, and not on how many planning law boxes it manages to tick. Your planning officer states that the training of the dogs is not a recreational activity, but would be more akin to a medical one or a training use, whatever that means. And thus the application to build kennels fails to meet the development exceptions set out in the National Planning Policy Framework. Now I would argue that people obtain dogs as companions for their life and for their leisure. One of the main purposes of the dog training business is to improve the relationship between the dog and the owner in this context. Those of us who attend sessions at Canine Rehab do so because we enjoy it. Our dogs enjoy it. We all benefit from it. It exercises our bodies and our minds. It's education, information. It's also sport and recreation. Unfortunately, a regular session isn't enough for some dogs. Some need more intensive training, and this can only take place within a boot camp environment. In order to assist these dogs and their humans, Canine Rehab seeks to expand their facilities to allow overnight stays for dogs who need a more focused level of training. Please don't imagine that the owners drop off a bad dog and pick up a good dog. It doesn't happen like that. The dogs benefit from one-to-one training away from the distractions of home, but still with the input of their guardians. The kennels are an essential element of this, a place for the dogs to relax, but stay focused between sessions. And the goal is the same, for the dog and owner to enjoy their time together. The need for such a facility has increased in line with the huge surge in dog ownership during lockdown, as Sharon has explained. It's gone crazy. It's going to go even crazier when the government seeks to solve the dog problem by banning certain types, thereby causing people who own those types to seek help, focused on improving their control over their dogs, in order to obtain exemption and be allowed to keep them. Wouldn't you not rather the owners of these dogs sought skilled help to be responsible owners? Should you not be supporting a business which offers this level of skill? The kennels are not a row of concrete bunkers, but rather wooden buildings which I don't think go against the rules of the current local plan, whatever those rules may be. The residential building is a single-storey stable extension which is compact and unobtrusive. It's hardly Southfork. It's not a glamping site. It's not a barn conversion. It's simply somewhere for someone to live while looking after the needs of the dogs and the land. I would invite the committee to look forwards a few years. When Labour wins the next election, we will be looking at a radical shake-up of planning law. This will have a much greater impact on greenbelt land and the aspirations of any small businesses. If you turn this proposal down yet again, the tenants may decide to relocate their business elsewhere. They may even decide to sell their land. And yes, this will remove the current problem, but it will also remove any protection that their plans provide for the site, leaving it prey to a developer of executive homes, or maybe another battery storage unit or worse. Wouldn't you rather have it safe in the hands of a business run by people with a genuine desire to preserve and curate their natural environment? It's not just the big developers who launch costly appeals. I understand that if Pendle Borough Council continues to refuse this application, the applicants are prepared to appeal to the Secretary of State. They have been informed by several other councils that they would have no problem in approving the plan. And if they were to do this and they were to win, their appeal were to be successful, they may well apply to have their costs to date refunded. Finally, please could I request a named vote tonight so we know exactly where we stand? Thank you.
Councillors, anyone wish to start with? Councillor Yasser?
Thank you, Chair. Chair, can I ask just a few questions of Neil, please?
Yeah.
Just in terms of the report, it's not numbered, obviously, so I can't take the page, Neil, but it says obviously there's 3 grounds for refusal. One is the impact on Greenbelt, then it's just the last page, or of the last page of this report. Then it's the noise assessment thing, and then the being in an isolated location. So can I just ask a question on the first point first, please, on the Greenbelt point? So it says here in the report, again, sorry, it's not numbered, but on the section where it says Greenbelt, on the actual report. So if we look 4th or 5th line down, it says, whilst these structures are modest in size, nonetheless an assessment of their appropriateness within the Greenbelt must still be made. And then if you skip a few paragraphs of lines, go down and it says, the kennels have their own impact upon openness and should be treated as the erection of new buildings for the purposes of 149 of the framework. So my question is that taking into account the sections I've referred to, this is an assessment on the or assessment of the appropriateness of these kennels on the Greenbelt, and is that an assessment that we make, or is that an assessment that are you saying that you've made that assessment and we can't have anything there? Can you just clarify that point?
Through you, Chairman. Government make it clear in the National Planning Policy Framework what is set out to be developments acceptable in the Greenbelt automatically, such as agricultural buildings and some other developments, and what is inappropriate development. So, unless it's set out that a type of development is, they frame it as not inappropriate, then it is automatically inappropriate. Whether it's 2 square metres, 6,000 square metres, it doesn't matter. And there's no assessment that you say, well, a small building is appropriate than a large building. It automatically is. If it's not a type of development that the government say is appropriate, it is inappropriate.
Because in the Greenbelt?
Because it's in Greenbelt. And that's just a matter of course. Now, one of the questions raised was what the purpose of this was, because recreation buildings can be appropriate development within a certain size. But you're guided here, Chairman, by the application before. The application is for rehabilitation and training use on the site. That's what the development is. So it is not, as a matter of fact, appropriate development. If it's inappropriate development, which the kennels are, the accommodation isn't inappropriate development in Greenbelt, because that does allow conversions. Then you, in order to be able to approve it, you would have to be content that there were very special circumstances to do so. Now, if you consent at that, then even though it would be inappropriate development, you could approve. but that's a planning judgment you have to reach, whether the kennels and the use, etc., would in itself constitute very special circumstances.
Okay. But that comes under the, is that third limb, isn't it, where it says it's in the isolated location, rather than, because the green belt doesn't, you're saying that we can't use special circumstances for the green belt exception, but we can for the isolated, or is it one of the same?
Sure, I thought it is confusing because you have the general policy of should you allow development in a certain location. That comes down to whether it's isolated or not. Then you have the greenbelt policy. So you have two sets. You've got to look at both.
Mm.
And parts of this development might be acceptable in general policy terms. So the kennels may be in open countryside acceptable, but not in greenbelt terms.
Mm.
Unfortunately, you've got layers of government policy within this. So the isolated issue is whether, just as a matter of principle, you should allow the conversion, because if it's an isolated location, and that's a debate for yourselves to have, and the points made that it isn't isolated, we've taken a different route. But if you take the point that it isn't isolated, then the conversion wouldn't be an isolated development, and it will be in line with normal planning policy. Okay. If it is isolated, and you come to that conclusion, sorry, it is confusing with this, then you have to have planning justification to allow that. So, is it an essential rural worker? And one of the ladies, I forgot who said, is it a rural? Is it an activity that is appropriate in a rural area? Yes, it is, but the issue is whether it's an essential. It's essential to have accommodation. So we're saying it's a rural activity, no problems with that. The report does say that. The issue for you though is it essential for somebody to live in that location? So you have unfortunately got a lot of intervening into winding policies, I'm afraid.
I've got a few more questions. Whilst I'm looking at it, is there any way of zooming in, Chair?
No, there isn't, I'm afraid.
Can I just check then, where are we looking? Can you just point to the location, please?
See?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a footpath which runs, which is referred to the north of those buildings across the field and beyond.
Yeah.
Parking, kennels around here, and then this is the existing building.
And them, I'm assuming them are the houses that some of the speakers referred to. So, I mean, if them houses weren't there, then arguable, isn't it? I mean, I'll come back to this, but it's arguable, isn't it, if them houses weren't there, that it's isolated. So what makes the author of this report say it's isolated?
Isolation isn't just about whether it's near a couple of houses, it's about services, it's about facilities, it's about schools. You can't access the motorway from there, can you? But it's about how easily you get to those services. Have you got footpaths? How close is it to those services? That's what isolation is, not that it's near 3 or 4 houses. I accept that, but isolation isn't just about that.
Okay, thank you, Chair. One other thing about this noise assessment, because when this came to the Bradfield Area Committee, Nelson and Bradfield Area Committee, there wasn't this noise assessment, and I think the applicant was going to look at some noise assessment. But I think my question at the last meeting, and I think it remains the same, is that what is that going to achieve in terms, because obviously we know there's a motorway nearby, and as far as I understand, I may be wrong on this, and if I am, they can tell me that it isn't at its maximum use anyway. So what are we assessing if the dogs aren't there as they would be once the application is granted, if it's granted?
Chair, from our end, we've got a property reasonably close by where we've had to serve a noise abatement notice because the kennels, it's a different relationship to this, but you're probably aware of it. So what the facility operates now mainly with dogs coming during the day, and obviously the motorway is noisier during the day. What we're trying to establish, as well as the noise during the day, is what would be the impacts in the evening, because obviously if it's quieter noise is going to travel further. And the people to the north have a right to make sure that their amenity is not affected. So a noise assessment would calculate that background noise levels, what likely impacts from the kennels, even where the dogs to bark, etc. So it's a normal planning process, Chairman.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have any questions for the moment. I've got a few comments, but I'll allow councillors to ask any questions before I launch into them.
Councillor Whip.
Well, I haven't really got any questions. I was going to make a few comments, really.
Do you want to keep all of them, yeah, or would you like to?
Yeah, okay. Well, I have been to look at this. Unfortunately, when I phoned Lisa, I didn't get through, so I wasn't able to see you. But I had a good look around the area, and I thought, well, this is quite a wide road, and it's got these big passing places, and I thought, well, what's that all about? So I followed it on. I went under the motorway, and I came to the biggest construction site that I've ever seen. And I appreciate that a sewage treatment works is something that you could have in a green belt, but I was pretty gobsmacked at the size of the work that was going on there, and I there was parked traffic on the road, Wood End Road, I assume it is, and obviously, yeah, that's daytime. I'm assuming that construction work isn't going on 24/7. However, it's not like it's a peripheral rural location and there's nothing else happening in the area. So I was quite struck by that, and it's not really something that I'd previously appreciated. The other activities that I could see, there were somebody mentioned a caravan further down. There was other properties that looked to be of this similar sort of nature. And when I went from Clegg Street at Bryan Field, which is the previous application we looked at, and I went into Burnley and travelled down Barden Lane, and then turned left over the bridge. So I appreciated just how close it was to that built-up urban area. In terms of the policy, and I do champion protecting the policy, because the policy we've set up to protect the green belt, to create other protections that the planning framework gives us, and so I do support policy, but we have used a get out of jail card previously, and it was in this neck of the woods, and we did find those special circumstances that allowed us to make a decision and not blow coach and horses through the policy. And I think that's the sort of situation that we should be looking at here. So I think that our special circumstances, in order to justify development in the green belt, would be that the nature of the activity requires a rural setting on the urban fringe, edge of the urban area, and I think that would be enough for us to be able to say to permit this to happen. The one thing that I think would be required before permission could be granted would be a satisfactory noise assessment, and so what I would suggest we should approve tonight, and if need be I'm happy to move it, but I would propose that we delegate grant consent subject to a satisfactory noise assessment being received by the planning authority. And there may be some conditions that the planning manager would want to put with that, but I think that's the way forward. I think that the local area committee has come to a view that this would be acceptable, and I certainly previously have found, for myself anyway, that this activity should be supported. So I think that's the way that we should go. I won't say any more at this point, but I think we've got special circumstances to justify the development in the green belt, and I think that the location, isolation question, given its proximity to the urban area of Burnley, is such that it's acceptable.
Thank you. Councillor Iqbal.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, obviously this has come to this committee and previous committees on at least 2 or 3 occasions, and Councillor Whip was referred to the Bradfield and Nelson Area Committee were reminded to approve. I don't think he went as far as to commend the Bradfield Area Committee, but in this case I think he should. I'll say that as a joke to Councillor Whip. Because I think we've approved this on previous occasions for the same reasons, and we came to the conclusion, I think unanimously, that this is an application which should be refused, and we felt on previous occasions as well that whilst there was this question mark about the green belt, that it wasn't the be all and end all, and I think there has to be some flexibility, because I think if this council wants to encourage new business and enterprise and be flexible towards residents and encourage businesses such as these and activities such as these, that there has to be some flexibility. Now I accept that that is not in terms of planning issue, but it's certainly a consideration that as councillors we should have. We've heard time and time again, this committee and the previous one, the number of speakers who are in favour of this application, and I've said previously as well that it's very rare for us to see in committees like these, where it's planning matters, for neighbours to attend or people that live close by to attend, speaking in favour of an application like this. I mean, in my experience, it's very rare. I can't think of another application, maybe apart from one other, in the last 7 or 8 years that I've sat on this committee and what it was used to call before development control or whatever it was. So it's very rare, and I think that again has to be taken into account. We've seen the map that the houses not very far from this proposed site, and I think it was one of the speakers who referred to herself as a direct neighbour. I think it was Tracy, and she spoke at the last committee as well and previous meetings, and I think that's certainly something that is taken into account, because if there was a genuine concern, then the only person or the main person that would be protesting is people like Tracy, and we've not seen that, Chair. And I think that in terms of Councillor Whip's comments on the special circumstances, and I think I agree that in this case there are special circumstances, and I think we need to be slightly flexible in this case, that whilst there is this definition of whether it's in an isolated location, it might be in terms of planning a terminology, but actually when you look at it, and Councillor Whip has set out the nature of this site, and if anyone's actually been there, you'll agree with him, because as he says, it's a construction site. Anywhere else then there might be a different issue, but here we have already, it's very close to the motorway, so that in my opinion negates the noise assessment issue. I'll come back onto the noise assessment and what I think of Councillor Whip's suggestion about the conditions being placed. But we have, I think one of the speakers also said 17 houses not very far from here, 200 yards from where the site was. So I think these are issues that we need to take into account. We need to apply, in my humble opinion, that there are exceptions that we can apply to special circumstances. You've heard all of the good work that this kind of business does. We need to encourage something like this in this borough. We need to encourage others to develop something like this and say that we are open for good, appropriate applications. And I think this is one of them. Had this been an application where all of the people that are accompanying Lisa were against the application, then there might be a slight balance that we have to draw, that we've heard from residents and people complaining that this isn't a suitable service. But in my view, I think if there was ever a case where there are special circumstances, I think this is it, not only for the type of service that she provides, but also, as Councillor Whipper said, the location of this site. Because if this was stuck in somewhere near in a countryside on a main road with nothing else, then that's a different issue. It's not one of them sites. It's in my view quite a unique site. You don't get these kind of sites, and when I say unique, I mean the way it's near the sewage works, the motorways and everything else, the camper vans that are dotted around near that site. So I think in this case I would fully support approving this application as we've done previously, and I would urge members around this table to also vote in favour of this application. Thank you, Chair.
Anyone else wish to speak on it?
Is there a second?
Yeah, are you seconding?
Are you seconding? Is it Councillor Whips? You've seconded.
I'm seconding Councillor Whips. Yeah. I'm not sure if he's moved it. Have you moved it?
Well, I more or less did, yeah.
Right, well, that's fine. Thank you.
We delegate.
It was delegated
Yeah.
consent, yeah.
Yeah.
That's it.
Go on, Councillor Coburn.
A couple of questions, Neil. What do you say about the fact that in the other authorities there is a belief that they would approve, or their planning advisors would approve this or recommend approval for this application?
It's an awkward one because I don't know, but I think it would be professionally unacceptable were they to other local authorities to comment on our applications.
Okay.
And that would be out of order. Burnley was mentioned. I hope they haven't, because that would be unethical.
Okay. All right. Councillor Whip suggests that the special circumstances is that this is a rural activity, but it needs to be on an urban fringe, and that would be his special circumstances. Do you think that they are special circumstances?
Chairman, we put it in black and white that we don't, but at the same time, you are a planning committee, you have that discretion.
But in your opinion, that's not a special
Well,
circumstance?
it's not, but in combination with, and it's more about the kennels and the overnight kennels that were at odds here in many ways. It does do a good job, I'm not denying that, and you can, I think it's within your legitimate scope to conclude that it is very special circumstances. I think you have that ability to do that.
Okay.
Lawfully.
And the final one is this other paragraph the penultimate speaker brought up. I'll just read it. It says, taking care of 5 dogs overnight is not an adequate justification to justify the conversion of the stable to a dwelling. And the question was asked, then 5 dogs isn't, but would 150 dogs be? And obviously being a ridiculous opposition to that. Is there a number, or would you say that even any number of dogs, that's not a justification?
Chairman, I'll answer it a slightly different way. It's easier in agricultural terms, because agricultural, you have a certain number of person hours, man hours to get to, and cows are given a certain amount, and sheep, etc. So there is a continuum about it. If you were, for example, to say, well, we're going to put 1 sheep on a plot of land, you wouldn't expect to have a house.
No.
400 sheep, yes. There's a continuum somewhere in between. It's the same with dogs. You know, would 4, would 3? One of the speakers said, well, just having 1 dog needs looking after. If that's your criteria, you're going to have houses all over your green belt.
That's true.
So 5, it's a judgment, but what do you do with the 5? You're not there all the time. It's not, for cows, for example, and sheep, you're to lamb, you're not doing that with the dogs. You're not there overnight and having to do that. So 5 to me is on the very low side.
I see. So the number is important.
It is important.
If I may just sort of highlight this to the committee. Similarly, the building which has been converted was not redundant, because usually if you're talking about Class Q or something like that, you have to wait 10 years for the building to become redundant. But it was an active use as a stable. The very reason it is having to be extended with a tack room is because the living accommodation has forced an extension to the building in order to accommodate mixed use. So that is part of the application as a commercial dog training business, which I don't doubt for a second does good work. Mr. Watson continues, there is no need for this to be present within the green belt. Moreover, the scale of the business, so that's going back to the 5 dogs again, does not justify the need for a dwelling on the site. They are not buildings for agriculture, nor are they in connection with outdoor sport or recreation. That's a point that's been argued tonight, whether this is recreation. You think it's education. The kennels are not physically attached to any other structure where they could be assessed as an extension. That's always a thing, isn't it, in Greenbelt, where you're looking at separation distances. The kennels have their own impact upon openness and should be treated as the erection of new buildings for the purposes of paragraph 149 of the framework. So, I've listened very, very carefully to what everybody's had to say, but just reading this report, it's so clear to me that it is in contravention of Pendle's own support of the Greenbelt. Perhaps it is, you could say, unfortunate that the owners chose to buy this land in the Greenbelt, or you could also look at it another way, that designation, when we had our Greenbelt review, continued as Greenbelt. But it is Greenbelt, and on that basis, it affects other places that have Greenbelt. It could set a precedent if the very special circumstances are not considered rigorous enough. So I would propose that we refuse this application, and I don't know whether anyone is going to second me.
Councillor Ahmed.
Thank you. First of all, I think I want to thank all the residents who have once again attended this meeting to speak very well, may I say, in terms of putting your case forward so eloquently. In terms of some of the comments which have been made by my colleagues and the residents, I'll just pick on some of them. Somebody mentioned a comment about when we consider this application we should be thinking about the impact locally. That's exactly what we have to do, is whatever decision this committee makes, the impact that will have in terms of setting a precedent, in terms of the policy. Another comment was there's no negative impact, it's not going to affect anybody. We've heard clearly from the professional advice and from my previous speaker in terms of the impact this could have on the Greenbelt. I mean, that's a matter of judgment for each councillor to make, and which way they decide to go when we get down to the vote. I've got no doubt that the business you're running is a great asset to the area, doing a fantastic job, a lot of demand and need in the area. Having said that, we still have policies which we have to follow and adhere to. We've heard comments about the local area committee who have supported this application consistently, which is fine. Having said that, I've consistently previously voted against the application on a number of occasions, and the reasons why I've done so in the past remain the same. Firstly, we've got the impact this could have on the Greenbelt. we've heard about the special circumstances case. I mean, that's a matter of judgment for each councillor to make in their own mind, whether they feel whether there are or not, as the case may be, special circumstances as to whether we should allow the application to be approved in the green belt. We all want local businesses to set up in Pendle. We do. We want to encourage businesses. But my own view is that shouldn't be at the expense of our green belt. If we start making exceptions like we do, especially in my view, I've not heard anything to convince me that a special case has been made in this instance. I don't believe it's in any of the exceptions. It's not a recreational use, and I don't believe it's appropriate development on this site. The second reason which has been put forward for refusal is the noise assessment. We've heard arguments that, well, there's a motorway close by, there's other residents, the residents are okay with it, there's a motorway. But that shouldn't mean, because there's a motorway there, and yes, there may be noise during the day, that we increase the level of noise in the area. And the noise in the evenings particularly, as Neil mentioned, would be louder than more audible in the evening than during the day. And also we've got to consider the impact on the nearby residential dwellings. And the third reason which has been put forward is this an isolated location? Again, I think that's a matter of judgment for people to make, whether they feel it is an isolated location or not. And also I think we've got to consider the point which has been made is whether a dwelling is required and whether somebody has to be on site 24 hours a day. We've heard the argument from the applicant. Yes, they feel there is a genuine need for having somebody on site at all times. In terms of the size of the business, I don't believe that's required, and for the reasons set out in the report, the three reasons, I will be seconding Sarah in refusing this application.
Councillor Suckley.
Thank you, Chairman. Neil, can I ask you a question, please? In terms of setting a precedent, does it set a precedent if it's approved? And is that precedent still the same if it's a temporary approval? And what does the temporary nature of that sort of entail as regards to green belts?
Yeah, the advice is that you don't grant temporary consents unless there's you have to test something out particularly, so you might allow this going forward. So you should either approve or not the application. You don't test things unless there's some debate around that. So your green belt policy is straightforward, and the isolation is a matter of judgment. That's the precedent. If you come to the view that there aren't special circumstances and it's isolated and you still approve, then clearly it's setting a precedent for you, because you're saying there aren't genuine reasons to offset your policies. But if you think there are very special circumstances, that can justify both the green belt and allowing an essential rural worker to be on there. So it is a matter of judgment for you based on what your findings are.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Iqbal.
Chair, thank you. Can I just come back on one or two things, just in terms of what colleagues have mentioned. Firstly, in respect of the precedent point, I'd written this down before Neil gave the answer, but I think whilst it's something I was wanting to speak about. I think that's an important point, Chair, that it doesn't actually set a precedent if we find that there's special circumstances. Actually, I don't think we can approve this application unless we find there's a special circumstance, which is why Councillor Whip has suggested there's special circumstance. If it wasn't a special circumstance, I think I'll be in some difficulty in proposing or seconding this application. So I think we found that there is a special circumstance, and therefore I would say that it wouldn't form a precedent, because every case is obviously different in terms of special circumstances, and the reason that certainly I've seconded Councillor Whip is that the reason for the special circumstances is not just the type of work they're doing, because that's not really planning policy reasons. I don't think that is the time. Maybe it is. Neil's nodding, so I'll take that. The other thing, the main reason I was thinking, Chair, is that as I said before, where this is situated, it's very rare to have this kind of. Councillor Whip's been. I'm not sure if any of the colleagues have been. Maybe they should have visited. But I think that if one looks at the situation, the location of this site, I think that it will be appreciated. Now, the other thing that was questioned was what is special circumstances, and if one of the councillors want to look, it's in the report. It's paragraph 148 of the policy framework, and it's towards the middle of that page. It says paragraph 1.148 says, very special circumstances will not exist unless the potential to harm to the green belt by reason of inappropriateness and any other harm resulting from the proposal is clearly outweighed by other considerations. And I think, without repeating myself, I think, and I only refer to this section because it was specifically asked, and obviously Neil provided his answer, but I think it's important to actually look at the relevant paragraph of the framework, and what it says is that clearly outweighed.
Many times.
Councillor Ahmed says he's looked at it. I don't think he has, because if he looks at it,
discussed it many occasions previously. He has been considered at previous meetings. It's not the first time we're discussing it.
Well, Chair, I think, with respect, I don't think it might be looked at, but it's not been properly considered. Because if you properly consider it, Chair, I'm not talking to Councillor Ahmed. I'm talking to
Councillor Ahmed. Would you like to comment afterwards?
If you want to comment, come back after. I'm not have an argument with you. It's my opinion, and if Councillor Ahmed doesn't like that opinion, then so be it. I'm saying that there are special circumstances, and I think that we should consider this as a case. And coming back to very finally the points that two of my colleagues opposite made about planning policies. Now, it is a policy we accept, but we as councillors, Chair, on here to just say, well, this is the planning policy the council has made, we therefore rubber stamp this, because that's effectively what's happening. They might disagree, fine, but we are here to look at the policy to see if there is a way around, or after listening to residents, because ultimately we are here to look at and consider the comments of constituents and residents of Pendle. And I think to simply say, well, this is the planning policy and we can't do anything with it, well, actually I think we can, and we've highlighted that there are special circumstances. So I think we need to look at the policy. Obviously it is sacrosanct, but we can't just say, well, this is the holy grail and we can't deviate from this policy. That's not, in my view, the job of councillors. We should look at it, challenge officers' reports and say, well, is there anything that we could add, is there anything that we can work around? And I think doing that, I can't see, after listening to all the comments, I can't see a reason why I should deviate from the initial position as suggested, which was to second Councillor Whip's motion.
Councillor Ahmed.
Totally agree with Councillor Iqbal. We are here to listen to residents, and we should do. And I also agree with the point in terms of council policy, and we've got to interpret the policy within the rules and come to a view and judgment as for the right reasons. We can deviate from policy. I don't think anybody would argue against that, and at occasions we all have. I think all councillors, I don't think any councillor who's sat here who hasn't. I'm not convinced the case has been made for special circumstances. Again, it's a matter of judgment. Some councillors believe it has been, others don't. That's fine. I'm not convinced, not heard anything that I'm heard previously in terms of the arguments put forward for this site for me to change my view on this application. As I have done previously, I will be voting against the application.
Councillor Whip.
Thank you, Chairman. My intention is to respond to the debate. If there are other speakers, I would give way, let them come in first.
You want it?
No.
I think, can I make one final point, please? I mean, in this committee, I think it doesn't have to be a final, but I think we always have this debate about protecting our green belt, and yes, in exceptional circumstances, if a special case is made, yes, we can depart from that. But I think we've got to be very careful as to how we proceed in terms of Greenbelt policy. We hear all about it and people championing Greenbelt policy, but when it comes down to it, people are trying to find a way out of it. And that's the part I don't feel comfortable with, especially in this case where a strong case hasn't been put forward for the special circumstances.
Councillor Wick.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll pick up that last point first. And I genuinely believe that there are very special circumstances affecting this application, and I think those very special circumstances are the unique nature of the business, and its necessity of being both on the urban fringe but in a general rural setting is a unique set of circumstances, combined with the layout of what we can see up there, that there are a cluster of other dwellings, and I think it's the mix of all those different things that creates the very special circumstances, and that is crucial to actually defending the policy, because I would be one of the first people in the room to defend our green belt policy, but our green belt policy and generally allows exceptions in those very special circumstances. So I think we can demonstrate those very special circumstances, and Mr. Watson confirmed that is a judgment that each of us sitting here can come to a view upon. Councillor Ahmed says he doesn't accept that there are. However, if we as a committee agree that there are those special circumstances, then that becomes the position of the local planning authority. We haven't driven the coach and horses through the green belt, we haven't undermined the policy, and we've allowed something with its unique nature, etc., 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 to be permitted. But I'll come back to that. And Mr. Watson has confirmed that, quote, it would be lawful to accept that very special circumstances apply in this case. Now, Councillor Sarah Coburn-Price said that this could set a precedent affecting the green belt. Well, I think I've just set out why, by using the get out of jail card, very special circumstances, this does not blow that hole in the green belt policies. Councillor Sarah Coburn-Price also said that the number of dogs is important, and said, well, for instance, if it was 100 dogs, you could justify. Now, I part company here because I wouldn't want to look after one unsocialised dog. My older daughter has a massive dog that grew up in lockdown, and for the first 18 months of its life, all it knew was one room, and from what I can tell, not a lot of human contact. And she's been socialising that dog. To be honest, I don't visit her very often because this huge, I don't know what it is, but it's one of these sort of horrible dogs. Sorry, pardon me, dogs. It's just sort of big and muscly, and it's heavier than I am, and it just knocks it over. But she's socialising it and I've no doubt that if I visit her in a year's time, it might be social enough to actually live with people. But I think, you know, if you've got 5 unsocialised dogs, then that is more than enough to be coping with. But in particular, if they are unsocialised, then they do need that individual attention, which then necessitates the requirement to be close at hand. So I think that stacks up as an argument. And then the final thing was about the noise assessment, because what I moved wasn't that we just approve this, but that we grant consent subject to the receipt by the local planning authority of a satisfactory noise assessment. So the applicants do need to demonstrate that they can deal with any noise arising from their operations. And I mean, given the river, given the motorway, the ambient noise levels will be quite high in that area, and a lot higher than you would have if you were, you know, half a mile further up the hillside towards Fenton Hyam. So I think, you know, it is dependent on a satisfactory noise assessment and how that is actually dealt with. And I did say that it would be subject to any further conditions that Mr Watson deemed appropriate to put on. So I think before we come to a vote, you know, Mr Watson just needs to articulate what those conditions, in his opinion, would be.
Just a couple of points, Chairman. Just to get this right, so that we know what is being applied for. The vast majority of animals come in the morning. It's 60, going up to 75. Hopefully, that's in the planning statement, and it does say in the planning statement up to 15. I know Mrs. Tennant said 10. It does say in the planning statement 15 dogs at a time. The activities stop 7-8 o'clock. And then the issue is you will have 5 kennels there to house animals overnight. So the justification for the accommodation is principally around those 5 kennels overnight. So just that's your special circumstances. That's where the crux of it, because it can happen during the day. Like we all go to work during the day. We have canteens or whatever we may have. It can operate during the day. You don't have to have a house during the day. It's the overnight accommodation. So that's where the special circumstances would be. Conditions, Chairman, it would be not a great deal. I don't think there'll be some materials around kennels, standard, probably around feces disposal in there. It's waste disposal along that, and car parking, and then anything that comes out really of the noise assessment.
Yeah. Would anyone else like to speak on that? Shall we start by taking the vote on the amendment which was moved by Councillor Whip and seconded by Councillor Iqbal?
So I think it's straight for and against, isn't it?
That was the amendment.
Is it not just straight for and against? Same thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it's just straight for and against.
Those to approve, yeah. And then
that's fine then. All those for approval?
Delegate grant consent.
Delegate
approval grant consent.
For all those?
Are you not voting, Chair?
Are you voting?
Yeah, I'm voting for.
Those against.
All those against? Thank you, that's been approved.
Thank you.
The final application. Would you guys like to stay?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
The land will be looked after.
You're welcome to stay, but you can leave if you want.
Oh,
Leave the property.
thank you.
Very interesting application.
So it'd be fun, I thought I'll ask him
Thank you very much.
Final application 23/0564, erection of a dormer at 229 Everett Street.
And I didn't put the dormer plan on, so that's how it is. It is on the back. A dormer.
Councillor Suckley.
I can put it up if I want.
This property is incredibly prominent in the streetscape. I was quite surprised actually when I walked down this afternoon this evening and had a look at it, built in the midst of development.
Excuse me, sorry.
If it was a rear dormer where it was in the middle of a terraced street, and we've exhausted the discussions around dormers over the past couple of years whilst I've been on this council, but this one really is in a prominent position, very obvious whichever direction of travel you're in, whichever side of the street you're in. Therefore, I am happy to move a refusal on the application.
Can I, Councillor, just a couple of questions. Sorry, David. No, just a couple of questions, Neil. This dormer, because of where the property is, it's a side dormer. Is that, am I right? Is it at the back?
It's every street comes along, and then a row of properties, and it juts out. It's an unusual situation, so it's actually at the back. It's not at the side. It's got a plain gable. Well, not plain. It's got a gable on the street, so it just sits on the roof at the back. But the property juts out virtually. Well, it is the whole width of the property. So when you're driving down every street, that's what you see.
This is the fire damage property, which has been out for a number of years now. So, Neil, if this same applicant could rear dormers, if it was a mid-terrace on further up on, say, Harvey Street on that side, what would you be okay with that? Or is it because it's a conservation area, would you still not be happy with it? If it was a rear dormer?
If you were looking at the gable, so every street, so you were looking up the back of it, it is more hidden. I can't say what I would. It might depend on the dormer. There is one right at the top of the street, which is, to be honest, you don't really see. If it was in the middle of that terrace, it would be a different impact, but it isn't. Clearly, it's right at the end, and it's very prominent.
And it is a flat roof, is it? This one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Councillor Wick.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I went to have a look at it this morning. I agree that it's not your typical rear elevation dormer. There's an aspect of the application that I'm not happy with. I think it refers to the white UPVC, which I think could look a bit naff. But I do know that there are front dormers on the opposite side of every street. There's, I think there were 3 that I could see when I was looking at this property this morning. And on balance, and given the broader issues in terms of reoccupation of property, updating property, making them fit for present day use, upping the insulation values and the like, I would be minded to approve this. but to condition that the windows, the UPVC, were of a colour to the satisfaction of the planning authority, rather than just saying white. And I think that would be an adequate compromise between the need to protect, in keeping with the conservation area, and the needs of the potential residents. And then just on the technical issue, generally rear elevation dormers would normally be allowed in a conservation area. So technically it is a rear elevation dormer, but I fully accept that it is a particular circumstances here which means that it is highly visible from the front street. So I think that's the basis on which we'll just move forward.
I was about to say that, having been looked at it this morning, I agree with Councillor Ashley that although there are other dormers around, it's such a prominent position. I'd be more than happy to second the proposition to reject.
Councillor, just a quick one, sorry. Are you moving an amendment onto that, sorry?
Yeah, I would move that we approve, subject to the fenestration, if that's a technical term, being a colour to the satisfaction of the planning authority.
That's fine. Councillor Iqbal.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I can't actually remember this one at the last area committee, but I've just been looking at Google Maps and actually to refresh my memory as to what this is. This is obviously the old burnt out property which has been now renovated. Yeah, I've got it here. Thank you. Yeah. Just in terms of Councillor Whip's point, I think it's a minor point, I don't necessarily disagree, but looking at it, there's from 229 Every Street, if you was to stood at the front and look towards the centre of Nelson, you can see the two dormers, they're both white, and they're not actually very far, it's only a block away, but perhaps Neil can comment on that. I don't particularly have a view on that, but I'm just thinking, if there's already two on a block less than 100 yards away from it, does it make a difference whether this one's white or not? That's obviously in the conservation area. That's just a minor point. The other point, Chair, is that obviously this is one of these, as Councillor Whip has said, and I think everyone probably agrees, it's quite an awkward property, if I can put it that, because it doesn't actually have a rear, because if the back end backs off to Hargreaves Street, it's quite an unusual property. And if it was, obviously Hargreaves Street, you can see towards the top of Hargreaves Street that there is a rear dormer. It makes it slightly different in this case, because whether the applicant puts it on either side of that pitched roof or of the roof, then technically it's always going to be a side dormer type application. So I think, Chair, in the circumstances, I second Councillor Whip's motion to approve this application.
Thank you. Would you like to quickly speak on that from Councillor Corbyn?
Well, Chairman, you pay me to give you advice on this. I'll be blunt with this. If you approve this, your design policies are virtually out of the window. You're in a conservation area. It's one of the prime conservation areas for being intact in the country, and it will stick out like a sore thumb. I will find it really difficult. We've got a situation, Combe, for example, where enforcement action will be taken. This will be thrown at us. I need to be clear, if you do this, you will have great difficulty resisting anything in forms of design going forward. But it's your choice. I'm giving you that advice.
Councillor Corbyn Price.
We've had recently a few of these in Trawden and Fulbridge. There's one that's live in Fulbridge at the moment, and it's unfortunate for the householder. There's an unusual orientation. It's against the general flow of the houses. We all agreed at our meetings at Cone Area that these in other locations would be absolutely fine, but in these locations they would be highly, highly egregious. And actually in one of these, the applicant was in the room with us, listened to the discussion, understood that unfortunately his house was orientated against the flow of other buildings, agreed with us, and has gone for a conservation roof light instead, which is understanding the argument and being pragmatic about it. It's really clear that this is a very important conservation area. When I drove down there again, I was struck afresh at the beautiful simplicity of these terrace streets. The repetition is so important. There's a wonderful programme on on Radio 4. You can listen to it on iPlayer. It's by Thomas Heatherwick. It's at 9 o'clock on Radio 4. The last episode was Tuesday. And it explains to you about how the human eye is conditioned to look at repetition in Georgian terraces and in Victorian terraces, and why we find certain things pleasing and why we find other things unpleasing. Now occasionally you can have a standout building, this presents its gable into the road, and it isn't unpleasing, but it makes you look at it. And for that reason we should be super anxious in this location about doing anything. I would also draw your notice to the heritage statement. If you read the heritage statement, it talks of two dormers, front and side. So I wonder whether in fact the applicant has another one coming forward, because the heritage statement suggests that there are two. I see nothing wrong with the colour white. I have a listed building. My windows are white. They're not brilliant white, but they are white. White is a very traditional colour to have. I don't think it would be wrong. Obviously, UPVC is suboptimal in the conservation area, but I'm sure that Mr. Watson would say, well, we haven't applied an Article 4 directive, so it's part of that applicant's permitted development rights. There's also a problem that upset me really, but I don't know whether it's a planning reason. The next door neighbour put on the portal a tale of woe about their misery and how the current roof is causing leaking into their own property. I guess that this is out of the scope. I felt as much. I just felt so sorry for the next door neighbour. So I will support my colleagues in refusing this, and especially after the very clear words that Mr. Watson gave us, how it will affect the entire borough, not just this beautiful conservation area in Nelson.
Councillor Sutcliffe.
Thank you, Jen. I've got to echo what Sarah's just said. It's not often I walk through Nelson. My reasons for being in Nelson, down particular streets, tend to be because of planning applications and going and seeking out properties to have a good look at them, to scrutinise the things that are before us. And I was on the train and I've been on foot, and I've had a good walk through Nelson and really enjoyed how beautiful it is walking down every street. It's surprisingly beautiful for Nelson compared to its reputation, and I think that's why we have conservation areas and why they're so important to protect them.
Sorry, Asha, I said I'd stop digging when you...
No, I said compared to its reputation. Nelson doesn't have a reputation for being beautiful, and I would argue against that. I think that it has some very beautiful buildings, and every street is a surprising example where you can find beauty, and that's why it's had that much money spent on it in the past. That's why it's a conservation area. That's why it's so important to focus on things like this, which are fundamental to protecting the aesthetic of that street. It's really important. Now, and I completely agree with what Sarah said about the white windows. That's neither here nor there in terms of colour for this. The problem is the structure of the building, the shape of that dormer is completely wrong, completely at odds. It is at a junction and a crossroads where the road is very wide, so the property is extremely prominent there. It is wrong to put that dormer on there.
Councillor Ahmed.
Can I just follow up on the colour? My own view is, I think if the colour blends in with the roof, with the slate colour, the grey, I think that looks more in keeping with the area rather than having something like the colour white. There's nothing wrong with that, but I think it does blend in better and doesn't stand out as much. That's my personal view on it. Neil, in terms of this, a flat, I don't like flat dormers. If there was a pitch roof, would you be slightly more happy?
Better, but I don't think it would solve that there. And it's a big dormer as well. It's not just a minor one. It covers the whole of virtually the whole of the roof space.
I think the pitch roofs do look generally much better than a flat roof.
Councillor Iqbal?
Two things, Chair. As I'm asking my first question, can we see the plan, Neil? Is that possible? I don't know. Is they going to be digging too much? Or is it there? So I think it's important. I can't visualise what you mean. So whilst Councillor, yeah, please if you can. Gully is getting me that plan. Can I ask a question? In terms of, I should have looked at this before actually. The sole reason for the refusal is the design. Thank you. Is the design. So are we saying that it's the design that you aren't happy with? It's not the principle of the dormer? Because normally it's both?
It's both, yeah. The design's poor, but the principle having one there of that scale will change the roofscape in along every street and contribute to worsening it. Just whilst Councillor Iqbal's doing that, when I came in many moons ago, we'd just come through a public inquiry because the council wanted to demolish Whitefield, a lot of Whitefield, and the Secretary of State's decision on that was very clear, and that's why we got, and I think it was mentioned, tens of millions of pounds. It's the quality of the streetscape, the intactness of it, that's its quality. That's why Whitefield was designated, and that's why that money, not because of the intrinsic value or the value of particular houses. There's very few listed buildings there, in fact only 2 or 3. It is the intactness, and it specifically refers to the roofscapes. So to change that quality undermines a lot of that rationale.
If I could just pick up that issue, because yes, it is a conservation area, and the conservation area status was sought. It unlocked the funding that's been referred to, and we, instead of demolishing hundreds of properties, they were retained, reoccupied after a long number of years. And there was some new building carried out, the Waterworks building. Obviously the school was built, and it's an example of urban regeneration that I recommend colleagues elsewhere in the country come and have a look, see what we did. And I think the key word in that is conservation, and I don't see conservation as being something that preserve things in aspic. I think that our homes need to reflect the realities of our lives, and I mean, I've lived in tourist houses for decades, and I think they're absolutely fantastic. What they're not good at doing is insulation, so the money pits in terms of heating, and the consequentials of that impacts on people's health. The housing conditions could be damp, or people are paying a fortune trying to have them at a reasonable level of heating. So if we want to conserve our tourist streets, I think there's got to be a compromise between that retaining the aesthetics, the visual appearance, but actually making the homes more livable, because we are an area we have low wages, we have housing that isn't well insulated, we want to see energy efficiency measures being put in place, and when people extend into the roof space, it gives us an opportunity to really bump up that insulative value, which then means that they're much more energy efficient, and that then leads to a benefit in terms of the cost of maintaining them, cost of heating them, and there's a benefit in terms of zero carbon and reduced use of fossil fuels. So in coming to the view that this is acceptable, I'm taking into account these other factors which I think are equally important, because if we don't allow things like this to be done, what we will end up with, and I've referred to the fact that we did manage to save Whitefield from whole-scale demolition, what we'll end up with are row upon row upon row of tourist homes which are no longer fit for people to live in, and in another 50, 60, however many years, we'll be facing them getting knocked down because people won't live in them, and we'll end up with conservation areas not being conservation areas but becoming demolition areas. So that's my fundamental argument about why I think we ought to take into account the requests for the dormers, and my position has shifted over the years because again I've defended the policy. I think in this case there's sufficient space, wriggle room I would call it, for us to allow this, and it's not going to destroy the conservation area, but it might lead to this problem property, which, as somebody has referred to, is causing significant difficulties to the neighbouring property, to be brought back into use, to have a decent insulative value, and to have a life for many years into the future. So I think on balance, and it is a balance, that we ought to allow it.
Councillor Sutcliffe.
Thank you, Chairman. When the regeneration work was done in this conservation area, obviously architects and conservationists and experts were employed to look at these properties and assess their relevance and need to today's life. And as part of that, many of the properties were adapted. Some were knocked together, knocked through, made slightly bigger, and adapted in that way. What they didn't do was put dormers on properties, especially with flat roofs, because that is not the right thing to do in a conservation area to protect the aesthetic of the properties. So in some ways I agree with what Councillor Whip was saying, that properties should be fit for the 21st century, they should be fit to live in, but not at the expense of the conservation area, not at the expense of changing the aesthetic of a very beautiful street. There are other ways to do that, and the examples have been made across every street already. Therefore, my point still stands. It's incongruous.
And there's always the opportunity for them to have a roof light, just like they did in Jordan, if they want that extra floor. I've lived in a terraced house in Radcliffe and Manchester for many years. Two-bed terrace doesn't sound very big. Actually, every single room was a really good size, and the bathroom was vast. These are very generous homes, not in the numbers of the rooms, but in the scale of the rooms. They've got nice high ceilings. They give a sense of space. I think that they are a sort of house type, a terraced house, that will endure for centuries. And obviously, insulation, being the chairman of the Climate Emergency Working Group, is a very important thing for me. It's a challenge that our residents face more than other areas. Not only do we have a colder climate than, say, Blackpool, but we have very few houses that have that don't have solid walls. Thankfully, they're designed. These houses are designed to get wet and then dry out slowly. They're not meant to repel rainwater. In the last couple of years, there's a product that's been developed that overcomes the need to have a separation gap and internal dry lining. It's called Aerogel, and Aerogel is about that thick, and it provides incredible insulation value in solid wall houses and allows that breathing process to continue. So actually it is something that anybody could do with some disruption, but not a great deal. Their rooms wouldn't get smaller. It wouldn't be so awful to just do the external walls of a terraced house, because in fact you don't have the side walls usually, you do it in this location, but usually it's just front and back. So it is doable, it is possible to make the terraced house updated for the 21st century. I think it's a very green way to live. You're not having a house with lots of external walls like you do with, say, a modern house.
Any other speakers? Move on to the vote then. All those for approval? Against?
Any abstentions?
Any abstentions on that? So, well, thank you very much.
Next to you, Chairman.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking them. I'm actually asking them.
Yeah. Perfect, thank you.
Yeah.